Hello and welcome to the Motogp Xtra podcast. Joining me today, as always, is Rhys. Now, today is the penultimate round of the season, and let's be honest, it's been one of the most juicy rounds in Moto 3 and MotoGP. And to be fair, Moto 2 was a very intriguing race also. Shame there's no title battle there. But we're going to basically start with Qatar. Qatar has been completely redone. Now, I don't even have it in the notes because I forgot to put it in, but we're going to cover it anyway. Rhys, all the work, all the millions and millions and millions on buildings, pit complexes, tracks, curbs, everything. What have you made of the new and Qatar 2.0, could you say?
Yeah, it was interesting to see. Obviously, if you're an F1 fan or watch the F1, you've seen it previously, like we have when we watched the F1 Qatar Grand Prix. So it's not all completely new, but especially it's kind of more noticeable. When they show old clips of the previous races when they're like hyping up for the event, and they show like Marquez Dovi and stuff. How different it actually looks. I didn't notice when they went to F1 that it was massive different. I thought, oh, they've painted around the outside of the track. That looks quite nice, but you really do notice when you see it back to back. The something that hadn't really been mentioned before the weekend is that the finish line is now in a different place. It's actually closer to the last corner. Not quite sure why that's changed because they've obviously just decided to change that since some of the configurations changed anyway. Obviously makes no difference to lap records or anything like that, but just changes the race because we saw in the past Qatar, well, it's definitely one of those ones where a slipstream first to the line in pretty much all the classes actually. It could happen even in MotoGP as I think Jean Mir was in like 21 where he got like dragged for like two Ducatis towards the line. So that had changed things a little bit, but yeah, it was good to see. The paddock was obviously quite big, quite heavily revamped. Not that particularly, you see a lot of the paddock obviously not being there. You see it a little bit, especially on like TNT or as BT Sports, I suppose it was last time they went there. But on that channel, on the coverage, you obviously see the paddock in the background a little bit because they do a lot. They show the paddock, but yeah, it did look like it had been redone. Obviously, there's a few more buildings. The city looked a bit more bustling, a bit more stuff. Obviously, as well, there is the F1 side of it that they revamped the track, but of course, the World Cup was at Qatar since we last went as well. So a lot of infrastructure put in there. So yeah, it looks like a big development. Obviously, some of the runoff areas changed. The curbs obviously very different. One thing actually that was fantastic that we haven't really got in the notes is no track limits issues at all because the curbs are designed to make you lose time. So if you run wide, you get a bit penalised, but it's not you race over. So that was fantastic. We didn't see a single track limits warning or no laps really going for track limits all weekend. So yeah, to be honest, overall, I think it was great to see Qatar back. A little bit weird that it's not the start of the season, but some nice revamps. And yeah, probably my only criticism would be that they've moved the finish line. I quite liked the drag to the line, but also I can see why, as a rider, it's a bit annoying that you get slipstreamed up towards the line.
Yeah, I agree. The line was one of the bigger issues. From the aerial shots and a lot of the other camera angles, it looks very F1 esque now. It was kind of for a lot of the weekend. It felt like GP was at like a Bahrain. It looks like a real F1 track now. It's kind of not the dusky, deserty Qatar and Doha that we're used to in the GP. Coming through turn 3, as you have the long stretch from 3 to 4 on the right side there for previous years was just arm coat. Now it's all like built up like more like a Formula 1 venue. So I'm not too sure how safe that is as you come through turn 3. We saw a couple of crashes there this weekend. Turn 3 on a GP bike could easily be 120 miles an hour. If you happen to go back that way, you don't have much leeway between a wall, which goes the whole way to turn 4. So that was one thing I noticed. And again, like we said, finish line was different. A lot of the gravel traps have been pushed back, and just overall, there's a lot of new kind of pit complexes. Everything looks like it's just been brought a bit. Not that Qatar was ever an old and kind of neglected track, but it kind of looks like I suppose Abu Dhabi in a way, where it has these massive pit buildings and there's a lot more around the track. And again, like you mentioned, the World Cup, so it looks like Qatar has been spending a lot of money on stuff at the moment. But we have a real bumper packed podcast to get through, so we're going to jump straight into Moto 3, where supporting Dennis Untrue this weekend was his Manur Keenan Safoglu and good friend and training buddy Topak Razgatlioglu. Now, I saw the two of them. I instantly knew Untrue's race was going to go one of two ways. He was going to mess up, or he was going to beat the GP lap time. One of the two. There was only two things that could happen. Anchu was so pumped before the race with having Toprak and Keenan there. There was only one. And it didn't even. He messed up before the race even started. Rhys, take the start away from me.
Well, he said he was pumped up. He was just obviously so eager to start the race, he couldn't wait. He just went straight away. But yeah, such a shame. One of those ones where obvious jump start straight away. He knew it straight away. Everybody knew it straight away. And that was pretty much his race run, right? I mean, to be fair, he did really well to cheat back up onto the podium in the end. We didn't see a massive amount of his race, unfortunately, because obviously we had some. Well, they had the championship to focus on. Of course, that's going to be the priority all the time. But Onchu coming through the pack is always quite interesting. He took the lead, didn't he, initially? Obviously, he jumped to start. Then he dropped back to like fourth. I didn't see how that happened. I imagine he just ran wide or something. Then he got back up into the lead. Then he took the long lap. And then obviously that was pretty much the last we saw of him until he sort of slowly started to come back into shot as he sort of closed onto the back of the pack and did some good passes to actually get back through. But it's a shame for him that he ruined his race in that way. And like you say, it always seems to be whenever Keenan and Toprak are there that it seems to go a bit wrong. It's interesting that I didn't see his brother. You would have thought Chan would be there. He probably was, but I didn't see him. I don't know about you, but
No,
usually you get them all together. But yeah, perhaps he wasn't there for whatever reason. Obviously, he's not racing at the moment either, but perhaps he just couldn't get there or whatever. But yeah, I don't have a lot to add with it. Obviously, massive mistake. One of those really obvious jump starts. Actually did gain a little bit from it. Usually, like, it's a bit annoying because they don't gain much from the jump start. Served his double long lap. Had a pretty good ride up to third. Potentially could have fought for the victory if if he hadn't jumped the start, because he'd have been up there obviously to make up 6 seconds. You would assume that he'd be in the victory fight, but I think he probably would have got slipstreamed. He was probably one of the only people happy with the last corner being much closer to the finish line. I mean, if he was fighting for the win, he wouldn't get dragged to the line.
I think personally, just on his whole weekend and Anshu as a rider, I think without the jump start, he is probably going to win that one. Just with the Sasaki, Masia battles, other riders trying to get good results, I think Anshu could have probably put a pace on that race. And if for example, he nails Stakas straight into lead, I think he could maybe not check out, but I definitely think he could stretch the group and we wouldn't have such a kind of battle race. It'd be one of those races where you might have kind of top 3, then like 4th down to 9th, then some kind of gaps throughout the way. But unfortunately, Jumpstart kind of, I wouldn't say ruined his race because he ends up 3rd on the podiums, which is by no means an easy job to get that back after losing basically 6 seconds, 3 seconds for each penalty. So it was a shame really because they interviewed him before and they interviewed Keenan and Toprak, and Keenan was like Keenan bigged him up so much that it was like the race was already over. He's already won this one. He was just going to do 18 laps and pull into the park for him, and it was done. There was no question. But again, we always think Dennis is a bit hot-headed is the wrong way, but I feel like he gets maybe emotional in a good way, but sometimes it can kind of get in the way of his riding. So unfortunate that happened, but we're going to move on now to something that was also very unfortunate in my eyes, and it'll be interesting because we've not talked at all before this podcast. We've jumped straight in, read the notes, and gone straight in because it was such a busy weekend and just everything went on. We usually kind of have a little opinions on what's going on in Discord and throughout this, but we've no idea what each other thinks of Messia's antics in laps 7 and 8, 9, 10, whatever it was, early in the race, in the first half of the race, where twice into turn 6 sits up Sasaki. So essentially, the first time you could kind of argue maybe he's just gone off the racing lane at split 30 and he runs wide, picks up Sasaki not to crash. The second time he does it, does no question because he does exactly the same thing, but yet I believe he passed Colin Vera in there and he passed Alonso in there a couple of times, so the move was clearly possible. So for me, not great, but I'll come to that in a minute. I want to hear Rhys's opinions first.
Yeah, TNT kind of said it on the commentary that, like, funnily enough, he had no problems overtaking anybody else. It was just Sasaki. I watched it the first time. I thought that was a bit strange. I was like, surely he's not just picked up underneath him. And, tried to give him the benefit of the doubt that perhaps he didn't want to, take out his championship rival, so he did just pick the bike up. But there was actually contact as well, I think, the first time when he picked the bike up and ran them wide. And I just thought, well, I hope that was an accident and not on purpose. Then obviously he does it again. In pretty much the exact same manner, probably slightly worse this time, running them both wide. And it's just like, you can't do that. Like, it's legal, technically, although I think it is borderline. I think that's, it's just kind of like the Rossi Marquez thing, sitting up and running wide. I think that may have been what he actually got the penalty for. I'm not exactly sure, because obviously it was a bit inconclusive at the time. But it's, obviously, Messiah got a conduct warning for it, so clearly the stewards weren't happy with it. But because it technically, it's not illegal really to pit the bike underneath somebody, and it does happen. BSB, Glenn Owen did it to Tommy Bridewell at Brands Hatch. Not as bad, obviously, but it does happen throughout other times. I think Lorenzo did it to Pedrosa once at like Valencia in a hard to decide. I don't even think he was against Pedrosa that day. I think it was Lorenzo versus Marquez, but I feel like he sat Pedrosa up anyway for some reason. But I could be mistaken, but I seem to remember that in my mind. But it does happen, and if he did it just the one time, especially that first time, when you could argue, kind of like it's a bit on the limit, a bit cheeky, but it's just about acceptable. Like, it's not really, it's a bit dirty, but if he did it once and it was that first time, you kind of be like, it is a bit of gamesmanship, it is a championship. But to do it again a few laps later, yeah, that's not really on. I mean, I didn't really think it was on the first time, but I'd perhaps given the benefit of the doubt if he just did it the one time. But then that was Masia, right? Masia did it a couple of times. Obviously got the conduct warning. Sasaki gave him a bit back, obviously, into the fast rights. There was a bit of contact when he made a pass, and they were obviously a bit more aggressive with each other after that. But ultimately they both came off quite badly from Masia picking them up. Obviously, it pushed Sasaki back a bit further, and obviously that's what he wanted to do. I don't know why he was so desperate to do it, because it's not like, if the points were the other way around, I'd understand it more. If Masia had to get the gap to Sasaki, he'd obviously need everything to go his way. He'd need Sasaki to drop back to the pack. So I'd always understand it. Again, I'd still be the same thing, saying it's not on, you shouldn't be doing it, but at least it would make a bit more sense. Whereas Masia had to win and finish fourth. That could have happened anyway. Like, that's quite a likely scenario that it could have happened. Obviously, Sasaki looked pretty quick, and they were running 1 and 2. But with the Moto3 scrapping, and what actually did happen in the last few laps, obviously, Moreira got knocked off by Ortola, so obviously Ortola was out of the picture. There was a bit of contact. Some of the Hondas were getting involved all of a sudden out of nowhere, like Ricardo Rossi, and so it could have happened. It could quite easily have happened, and we'd be like, great ride from Masia, first place, winning the championship, fully deserved kind of thing. But for some reason, he decided to sit up Sasaki and mess around with him, even though ultimately he was the one in the driver's seat. Like, he didn't need to win it today. He could, if he won today and Sasaki was second, he's got a very good shot of pretty much like just finishing behind him in Valencia. He only has to get like a top 10 or whatever to bring home the championship. So why kind of put a black mark against your name? But you know what, it's one thing for Masia to do it to Sasaki and whatever, because they are the two fighting for the championship. But it's even worse when his teammate then gets involved. I know, again, teammates do play the role, and if Fernandez just overtook him a bit aggressively and then held him up a little bit, again, a bit borderline, but fair enough. It is a race at the end of the day. You are allowed to overtake people. But Fernandez had no intention of overtaking him either time that we saw. Obviously, into turn 6, did basically the same thing that Masia had done. Then into the last corner. Last corner one was worse because he made no attempt at the apex at all. The turn 6 one, he probably actually didn't push Sasaki as wide as Masia did, to be fair. But in the last corner when he did it, no attempt. He just went for Sasaki. He wasn't even trying to make the corner. He'd have been easily able to pull off the pass because he just had a lot more speed. He's pretty much level with him. But he just aimed for him and ran him out of road, and that was pretty much it. Sasaki's race over. Tried to get back up into the top 5, almost high-sided, didn't he, on the last lap? But yeah, it's put a bit of a cloud over the whole thing. I know I've been going on for a while, but it's just not what you want to see. I don't understand why do it, because he probably would have won the championship anyway. I mean, he might not have won it today. Sasaki probably would have finished with the podium behind him. He might not have even won the race if it hadn't happened, but he did seem to have the best pace, and he still beat everybody else. Regardless of that, he still won the race on his own steam. So, not discrediting him for that, but it's just, why put a black mark? Because we've been going on about this year how well Masia's been riding, and obviously he seemed rattled. He seemed aggressive throughout the race, even, regardless of the deliberate pickups, and obviously Sasaki gave him a bit back once he'd sat him up, which, again, fair play to Sasaki. I've got no problem with that, because some guy runs you off the track, of course you're going to give him a bit of a clip as you go by, or sit him up or whatever. But yeah, I just don't understand why, because like we said, with Masia, to run so well all year, it would have been great for him to win the championship, but he just, obviously, which he has done, but you can't put a bit of a black mark over it. Yeah, ultimately he probably deserved the championship, in my opinion, in terms of the actual performance throughout the season, obviously being on the inferior machine. But it's just why do it like this?
For me, I'm gonna go back a couple of years to my favorite Japanese rider, Ayagora, when he lost the title to another Japanese rider, losing it to another Spanish, actually. Funny enough how these work out. Ayagora lost the title in 2020. When did he lose to Arenas?
It was 2020. Yeah,
Arenas. Did he crash in Valencia?
Yes, he crashed and then waited up a lap for him. That's what
crashed, came into the pits, came back up, and then came back up and battled it. And from that day, I've not been a fan of Arenas. I've always had an asterisk next to his name, regardless of how good, bad, And when I see, not that I'm happy when he crashed or anything, but I've lost a lot of respect because he came out and it took a long time for the stewards to kind of get involved and break that up. As soon as he came out and did a lap roughly near them, he should have been black flagged. He has nothing to do with that race. And again, I've gone really off the beaten path here with this, but the fact is, in championship battles, riders do stupid things, and Messia today has done something very silly, as completely taken the shine off the title for me.
Do you see it as bad though? Do you think
no,
it's
I don't see it as bad.
Did? Yeah.
No, I don't. Definitely not. But like, I agree with your point that if the points were the other way around and you felt like he had to make up points, again, you mentioned Glenn doing exactly trying to get Kyle right through and trying to create the situation where he could leapfrog Kyle on the last lap and then get the points difference across the line of brands. You could understand it. I'd understand it more if Sasaki did it, because at the end of the day, you have to create. You have to try. At the end of the day, is like most champions kind of have that sort of kind of mantra of, well, we have to try. Like if we don't try, I might as well go home. But the fact that the guy with the comfortable, well, maybe not comfortable, but with the sizable points lead, probably wasn't as quick as Sasaki today. I think the fact that Sasaki, when he got past into like P5, he made up like 0.7 on one lap over Messia. I think it showed that Sasaki again at Qatar is really, really strong. But just took the shine completely off of Messia's title for me, even though all year long I've been completely banging the drum about him, how he's the lone Honda. He's been quick many seasons before and just not been able to put it together for a full season, and he's had these issues where he's crashed under the pressure. He's crashed out of P6 in seasons gone by where it would have been smart to take 10 points instead of crashing, and this year he's done everything right up until now for me, and look, he's deserved the Mayas for the title, but that's not the way they should have won it. I don't see the need for it. I don't see the whole ganging up with Adrian Fernandez. That was wrong. The two Fernandez brothers have never been the smartest, in my opinion. They've gone down, well, again, I'm not to be slating Raul, but Raul has done some silly things in his time in GP and in Moto 2, but Adrian Fernandez shouldn't be on the grid next year. I think he should lose a seat for that. I actually think the turn 6 one was worse than the last corner. The reason for it is because he goes for lunge, picks him up, and as he comes out of the corner, he's looking around him as if to see where is he, where can I block him next. True. That straight away was worse for me, because the last corner is a block pass anyway. So even though he's made it aggressive and kind of run him wide and stuff, it's more of a normal pass there. Whereas into turn 6, he sits him up, and it's very Rossi Marquez, because he's sitting him up and he's looking at him kind of like, you can see he's trying to force him onto the sand, and then he comes out of the corner and he has a quick look to see kind of, oh, he's just there again, I'm going to go defensive here and make him go around me and try and force him out in turn 7. So Adrian Fernandez, absolute dipshit for that, to be honest. Alea part as well. Like, I know Messia and Fernandez are close, but I definitely think Leopard had a part in this.
Definitely, because they did the exact same thing. They'd obviously planned it.
Exactly.
Because it's the same corner as well.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe you could say that Fernandez saw Messia do it and think, oh, I might try that, but yeah, it definitely seems like orchestrated. And also, he's definitely not going to lose his ride because he's still with Leopard, so they're not going to sack him for doing what they told, what he was told. So, yeah.
Unfortunately, it's kind of the feeling more than actually what will happen. But
yeah,
it's just shocking because, like, they've been their legality in the championship was called into question multiple times throughout the years. Now they've never been caught with anything or proven innocent until guilty, I suppose is the term. But this is messy. This is not how you win a world championship. And like, I still look at, like, years have gone on now, and I still look at I still don't like Albert for what he did in Valencia, and I just look at Messia now and think, like, that was not needed. And like, he'll go to Valencia, he'll probably podium, maybe win it at some race, and they'll celebrate and he'll come back next year. But then, like, next year if he's struggling, I'll be like, well, tough shit. You've made your bed, sleeping it. Like, it's kind of your own fault. Like, it's just, it was unnecessary. Like, we go back to the point where it wasn't as if the points were the other way around. He had the advantage. He could have tried to. Fair enough, right? I had no issues with the hard passing and all the battling and trying to make a race, but you don't, again, as well, right? If you do it once, like, maybe you can go, right, look, it's all fair and love and war, but like, to do it twice instantly is any deals off the table for me. It's completely unacceptable. So the contact warning, I could have stretched that to a one long lap for it, because he did it twice. If he got a one long lap for a repeat offence, even though I think he should have got a contact warning for the first one, because at the end of the day, regardless if it's a mistake, regardless if it's on purpose, regardless if it's because of track conditions, he has contacted another rider and ran him out to the edge of the track. So it's a big mistake, purpose or no purpose. So that for me is a definite contact warning. He's then done it a second time, which is 2 contact warnings adds up to a long lap penalty. So for me, that should have been a penalty. I just think the stewards were probably a bit scared to hand out penalties in such a kind of heated battle between the two of them. But to kind of wrap up the point,
we've seen penalties for less. Remember
100%.
Banyai's penalty for sitting up Miller by just going underneath him.
Exactly.
Like,
so
if that's a penalty, then
exactly, that's if that's a penalty, that's 2 long lap penalties for each of the things that Messia did today. But I don't know. If I was in that Leopard team, I wouldn't be too happy celebrating a title by winning it that way. Like, there's ways to win, and that's not the right way. And like, what was the gap before? 14 points. He realistically probably goes into Valencia with 10, 12 points over Sasaki. That's sizable. That, like, even if Sasaki is to win, which he's not done all year, you have to be kind of top 5, top 4. So even at that, like, it's unlikely, even with the points going in. So he didn't need to do it. It's unnecessary, and we're going to move on now. I think you've probably had everything to say, as I've had everything to say about it, but it's just a shame the championship, which has been a great championship throughout the year, has ended in such a kind of state, really. So we're going to move on just to the overall race. Aggressive race from the outset. It was really aggressive opening lap. Obviously, we talked on the Sasaki, Messia, Adrian Fernandez kind of business, but just throughout the races, there was multiple penalties handled out. A lot of riders kind of being taken out. Ferfoli was taken out by Rueda.
Yeah, it was Rueda.
Who took out the Brazilian?
Ortola took out Moreira.
There you go. So just messy incidents. It was just overall aggressive and messy race. It felt like Moto 3, but it was just like, it was like a full moon. Everyone was out to kind of kill each other. So it was just a weird race. Did you kind of have the same feeling about the race as I did?
Yeah, it kind of had that vibe. It was all like aggressive from the out. I think it's almost one of those things where, like, as soon as somebody starts being aggressive, everybody kind of does it. So, like, Messia was stupid at that level, and the younger riders look at Messia probably thinking, well, if he's up for a fight today like that, then I'm definitely doing something. And it kind of just spurs. I think the tension is kind of there, just in all the classes as well in the races, because the season's almost ending. Some of these guys are obviously trying to, get better positions to the championship. They're perhaps within, position to get a higher position that could be worth a lot of money to them. A lot of their sponsors could be literally, fighting for their ride, or they could be trying to get a ride somewhere else. So there is, especially at this end of the season, there is that kind of extra tension, because some of the seats are going to still be up for grabs, and obviously some of the, there's still only one round left, so there are some riders fighting for the future. So I think that always plays into it a little bit, but it did just seem like an aggressive race from the outset. Take aside what we've been talking about already, like you said, there was the 2 incidents there. I think Munoz and Vicente Perez ended up off the track together at one point. Munoz and Finati, I think it was Munoz. Finati ended up off the track. I know obviously he lost the front and went off once, but he also then got ran off, I think, by somebody else. So there's quite a few different hard passes. Ricardo Rossi was putting some aggressive passes. There was some quite aggressive passes in those fast rights, and people like running each other wide, and it did just seem like a extra aggressive race, and probably because of the racing line as well. Obviously the racing line was quite narrow. We saw that in Indonesia, it was a bit crazy, some really aggressive passes, people cutting corners, doing crazy things. So it just seems to be like, for some reason, whenever the track's a bit dirty, they're like, right, let's see what we can get away with here. But yeah, I think it was quite over the top. There were some hard passes. Most of it was pretty fair, but there were, some obviously went one of the line with crashes or contact and stuff like that, which obviously you don't want to see. But I think there's a few factors. Obviously, it being the end of the season, people try to get good results, try to get championship positions, rides, etc. People, other riders seeing Messia and more experienced riders like that being aggressive, thinking, oh, I'll do that as well. And the actual track surface. So I think a few different things playing into that. And yeah, I definitely agree with you. It was a really, really aggressive race from the outset.
One thing I noticed when TNT went back to the kind of paddock, I suppose, and they were kind of talking, all 3 of them, Susie Perry, Sylvain Gantoli, and Neil Hodgson, all said, they kind of all asked each other the same question, did you enjoy it? And they all said, no, they didn't. And to be honest, I didn't either. From the outset, it got ugly straight away. And soon as Messia put the first one on it, at the time you're kind of going, oh, it maybe, yeah, because then they kind of, Gavin Emmett kind of tried to play devil's advocate. Oh, lucky, maybe he was on the dirty part of the track. Maybe he was kind of in his head of thinking, oh no, I can't take out my title. I'll have to pick him up and run him wide and save a crash. But as soon as the from there on out, there was just an ugly race, and the way the championship was ended, and the scenes in the pit lane afterwards, it was just a kind of an ugly end to a great season. But we're going to move now to Moto 2. Most intriguing race in the wild race, is that fair to say, with the kind of the battles, just the whole weekend really, just Acosta being slightly not at the races and a couple of other riders showing good speed. For my money, it's probably the most enjoyable race since probably Barcelona, maybe.
Yeah, I think so. It was probably the most interesting race in a while. I mean, still in terms of some of the other races, perhaps wasn't like the best compared to like Moto 3, but yeah, it was quite interesting. I think most of the reason why it was interesting was because the fastest guy all weekend, Aldeguer, made a mistake pretty early on. Had to come back through the pack. I think it would have probably been a bit more of a processional race if it wasn't for that. We also had Joe Roberts, obviously, up towards the front, getting pole position. Obviously, goes pretty well here, but he had a pretty shocking race. Ultimately, he had a good start, but dropped back in the end. So there's a few riders out of position. I think that's kind of what helped as well. That the order was a bit strange. I think the actual track surface plays a big part of that. Obviously, it's cleaning up all weekend, and it's a bit more abrasive. It's probably like the one of the circuits where the Dunlop tyres perhaps do wear a little bit, and it does play a bit of a difference. But we've seen this at like Qatar in previous years as well. If remember back to 2020, stands out to me. Like Marini was fighting for the win for quite a while in the race. I think he ended up getting knocked off for P14, like the last corner of the race. Like Qatar does have these swings sometimes, where in the last couple of laps, like things massively change, and because there were some riders out of position, it did definitely, it made more overtakes than perhaps you would expect. Obviously, Acosta, you make a good point, was just no way. He just did not have the pace all weekend. He just wasn't looking good. Obviously, Aldeguer having to fight through. Canet was obviously leading for a little while, fighting for that first ever race win. Gonzalez fighting for his first ever podium. Also, probably going to come on to that in a little bit. But yeah, I think overall there was a few more elements, a few more people involved. Dixon looked like he was sort of back on form a little bit. Obviously, he was suffering with vertigo last weekend, so that was part of the problem. And I think we were actually discussing it off camera like the other night, saying when was his last podium. It was actually Catalunya when he won, so it's been a while. I know he didn't get a podium this weekend, but he did seem a bit more up for the fight. I know, I think he finish like fifth in the end. Yeah, he did, but
yeah,
which is where he finished in Malaysia as well. But he was much closer to the guys at the front. So yeah, I think there was some good battling throughout, and that's not what we've had lately. We've had some pretty processional races, and I think we talk about the amount of crashes that I have when it's hot, greasy, bit of a cooler race at night. All of a sudden, some of those problems go away. So yeah, I think in terms of Moto2, definitely probably the best race since Catalunya.
Yeah, it was just the big part of that race for me is that there was many possible winners. We had Roberts, we had Vietti relatively quick all weekend, didn't have an amazing getaway, kind of went backwards a bit. Dixon looking a bit more racy. Iogora had not an amazing qualifying, but we knew had good pace. And then the fact that Aldeguer did make a mistake and go backwards, it kind of threw a wild card in. Will he be able to make the time back? Because it was 3 seconds at one point he was off the lead. So you think to yourself, like week in, week out, we say that like if you lose a second, it can take 10 laps to get that back, but it just shows that the outright speed and just the confidence and everything is pulling in the right direction at the moment for Firmin, that he was able to get that back on track, started to make, probably had a couple of steady laps after that, but then soon as he started to take positions, it just started to flow on. For long, he kind of got back to the top 3, and when he got into the lead, I think he pulled a gap, and then when Gonzalez got into P2, the gap closed for maybe 2 laps, and then I think he kind of responded. So in the end, it was just a race with many different winners, and at any point you were thinking, oh, maybe Joe Roberts looks like he's taking a bit of time out of Canet. Dixon's right on the back of it, and as Aldeguer was coming through, you kind of felt that the front 2 or 3 were going, right, we need to push pressure on each other now to see which one of us is really going to have a chance of winning it. Unfortunately, in the end, Aldeguer had just more than anyone, and it was really, really special, and probably the reason, really, Rhys, why he is on more than likely his way to Ducati. What do you think?
Yeah, again, he pretty much showed it. Obviously, the last 3 rounds, he's been phenomenal, but untouchable. Obviously, he's pretty much won them lights to flag, whereas this time, he had a bit of a different race to fight his way through, but then still pulled it away in the same manner at the front, so showing that he can also fight his way through the pack when needed. Obviously, Silverstone as well. Obviously, earlier on the season, he won that race, and I think that was a bit of a lights to flag. So it was pretty much like his first win that was a bit more fought for, which is not to take away from his previous wins, but it's always a bit more of a mark of a true fast rider when they can make passes too. It's not just hot lapping at the front. Obviously, again, there's still so much skill that comes with that. I'm not discrediting any wins that come that way, but it's that extra element. It kind of shows that you've got all the different parts and can actually come back from adversity, because we've seen in the past, not just necessarily in Moto 2, but in all the classes, when someone's looking really fast all weekend, they make a bit of a mistake early on, they end up crashing out like P7 or something because they made a mistake when they really had race winning pace. We've seen it happen so many times over the years, so it could easily have happened to him, especially when you have got all these rumours. Obviously, you're talking about him going to MotoGP. Obviously, first it was Repsol Honda, now it was Ducati is kind of where he's been rumoured to be. We've seen how much that can mess with riders' heads. Arbolino, I think, is a good example of that. It looked like he was set for MotoGP future earlier on in the season. That he really, his form dipped a lot then, and so it can affect you as a rider. So for him to be able to kind of put all that to one side, come back after a bit of a tough beginning to the race, fantastic job. And yeah, that's exactly why he's been touted for MotoGP, because he can win in multiple ways. And now that this bike is working for him, it's been unbelievable. Obviously, at the start of last season, he was really good. Dropped off after that. Kind of been nowhere till Silverstone pretty much, and since then, second half of the season has been pretty good. But these last few rounds, he's obviously found a setting that really clicks. It's just been unstoppable. He's been looking better than Acosta, effectively, which is unbelievable when you look at how good Acosta was and has been this season. Acosta was nowhere this weekend, which makes it look even worse. But he's pretty much dominated Acosta the last few rounds as well, which I think he's started to bother Pedro a little bit. So it'll be interesting, and I think I'd be surprised now if Aldeguer does not end up in MotoGP. If this whole Marini switch, comes into place, I wouldn't be as surprised if he doesn't go to Repsol. If Marini stays where he is, I wouldn't blame Aldeguer for staying in Moto 2. But if Marini does go to Repsol, I think it's kind of a no-brainer to go with Aldeguer.
Yeah, again, you make solid points there just about how it looks like Acosta came out nearly straight after his title win. He was like, yes, I want to win the last two races. I want to kind of show off that the reason why I've won the championship is because I'm fastest. And I think the fact that there's another up-and-coming Spanish rider making everyone look a bit silly at the moment in Aldeguer, Acosta's little, I wouldn't say, I wouldn't go as far as rattled, but I think he does want to kind of finish off maybe in Valencia with a P1, maybe a little battle with him and kind of an outright kind of demolition job of him before he finishes up the championship. Whether he can or not, I don't know, because for whatever reason this weekend, just didn't see any of them. But back to Firmin, was so good coming through. I did think, right, when he went back that far, I was like, 3.5 seconds, this will be his best win if he can do this. But I was like, I'm not too sure. It's really hard to go off track or off line to make an overtake. Track is very, very abrasive with the sand. There's many obstacles between him and getting back to even the podium, never mind winning. And then when he got into the lead, and when, like I said, Gonzalez took a bit of time out of him, he responded. So it showed that he just seemed to have everything covered today, and it was a brilliant weekend, and has been for a while. And him, a prospect of him on a VR46 Ducati next year is really interesting. It's one of those things. We'll have Marquez on the Ducati, we'll have Pedro on the Gas, and him on the Ducati. If that all came true, it would be one of the more interesting pre-seasons and starter seasons we've had in the last 5-6 years, definitely. So, just overall really strong, and I think he has a bright future ahead of him, and it'll be probably, realistically, you'd imagine it's going to be him and Acosta head to head in GP in a couple of years. It's kind of like the Pedrosa and Lorenzo coming through, where they're relatively same age, coming through at a decent speed, all coming through as top level riders. One of them was a champion, obviously, whereas back in Pedrosa and Lorenzo, they both were champions coming up into GP. So you never know, we could have
Lorenzo did wait for Pedrosa to leave though to win his championship, so it's
true.
worth noting that.
True.
Probably if Aldeguer sticks around next year, he probably wins the championship.
Yeah, exactly.
Form. So if it happens like that, then it would actually be very similar.
We've a shadow of the previous two, and in the end, Lorenzo waits for Danny to move up, and which one of them won titles? Lorenzo wins 3. Danny didn't win any, so we never know. So we've known for years the Lorenzo Danny battles are brilliant. We might have Pedro Acosta and Firmin Aldeguer in GP in a couple of years, kind of being the Marquez, Rossi, Stone, or Lorenzo, them sort of kind of top level riders. The Martin, the Bagnaia kind of battles at the moment that we're seeing. But moving on to Gonzalez podium, last few laps there was some serious battles between him and Canet, Igora and Dixon were fighting as well, all while Aldeguer was kind of pulling the pin. It was a brilliant last few laps. Gonzalez does get his podium, does get P2, by a couple of inches. It was a brilliant last couple of laps because there was nice battles coming in everywhere, and you just didn't really know where to look. It was very unlike Moto 2. Really enjoyed it. What did you think of it, Rhys?
Yeah, it was some good battles because literally those two that you were mentioning both went down to the last corner, and even the runs to the line for the battle for second. So yeah, it's not something you tend to see generally. Obviously, we do see these spread out races. I think sometimes further down the order we get these. I remember in India, Joe Roberts had a great battle with, I think it was Garcia, was it, for a pretty good position? Back in India, that was quite a good battle. Sounded like Joe Roberts and Sam Lowes were going out a bit further back. Actually, shout out to Sam Lowes. His pace was very good today, it seemed, but unfortunately, he ran wide, I think, at the same time as Adair, and obviously he wasn't able to come back through. But I think he could have been a bit of a podium threat if he was actually at the front and not made that mistake, because he set fastest lap on the last lap of the race, I think, so kind of showed the pace he did have. But yeah, the battles that were going on, obviously, Gonzalez and Canet battling, both kind of ending up in almost the best way because they weren't in their usual positions. Obviously, Canet finished second so many times. Gonzalez passing him puts him down to third, and Gonzalez finishing on the podium means he wasn't fifth for once. So those two kind of put themselves out of their normal positions. But yeah, we really went down to the last corner there because Gonzalez obviously got the drive at the last corner to the line after Canet passed him. Agora and Dixon were going at it the last couple of laps quite a few times. I was surprised actually to see Dixon go back at Agora because I felt like Dixon's tyres were kind of done. I thought he was kind of done. I thought Agora was just going to pass him and just pull away, but fair play to him, managed to stick onto the back of him. But, in the end, Agora just had that little bit more, just passed him at the last corner, and obviously got up into that P4. But both the battles are looking pretty good. It was good to see some battles because, like I said, generally in Moto 2, you don't get that one. We don't usually get a last lap, last corner battle, let alone two of them going on at the same time. So yeah, it was kind of hard to know where to watch because obviously the battle was the camera was focused on the second place battle, but you were also trying to watch the other battle at the top of the screen as well. So yeah, it was actually some nice to see actually for once. Actually, some good proper racing in Moto 2 because it does lack that quite a lot because I think of how close the bikes are and a tenth here, tenth there just makes a difference. Whereas people properly fairing, bashing, and going at it's always good to see.
As well for me, it was probably the last third of the race. It looked like Canet was probably just after maybe stretching too far and he was falling back and looked like Oyagor was coming through. So at one point, the third place on the podium was questionable whether it be Canet, Dixon, or Agora, and it was kind of like a turning point where they were all kind of condensing into one part of the track. But then Canet has the second win that kind of brings him through and gets almost P2 and a good battle between him and the other Spanish of Gonzalez, and then of course Dixon did such a good job because it did look like he probably just didn't have the speed of Oy at the end and brings it all the way to the last corner. And must say Dixon was looking incredibly strong in a straight line. The straight line speed of that engine looked really, really dialed, whether it was gearing or maybe a slightly fresher engine than everyone else around them. But I must say, yeah, it was just a really enjoyable race for once. And unfortunately, we don't see enough of these races in the Moto 2 because they are a bit more processional and you have similar tyres. And I think we've kind of talked multiple times on the podcast and probably off the podcast too that maybe next year with the overall softer construction Pirelli, we might get a slightly different season in Moto 2. We might get more of these battle races. We might get more tyre drop races, which is, I'd imagine, which means maybe last 5 laps we could probably see more action because there'll be riders with and without tyre, and you might see people going forward and coming back a bit. So it might change the championship up a bit next year. So I'm kind of hoping that it does in a way because I think Moto 2 has always been, it's kind of good, solid, and reliable, but never anything special. And I think is kind of what we've seen with the fact that the Honda engines were brilliant for reliability, never anything special. Triumph engines are a bit more unique and a bit more interesting, but still great for reliability. The frames are all very stiff, rigid. They don't really work that amazing. And then the tires are kind of, I wouldn't go as far as saying bowling ball tires, but they are really kind of stiff construction. So they kind of long lasting and stuff we've seen throughout the season many times. Last few laps, riders setting personal bests and going as fast as they have done in qualifying. So it just shows that after a full race, even the tyres are still kind of at a decent level. So maybe next year we might see something different, but pretty much sums up Moto 2 for this week. Now we're going to move on to GP and we're going to go straight into the action. Pecco and Martin Contington sprint twice. One of them was into turn 1, one of them into turn 6. Turn 6 is a bit more egregious for me. He kind of runs it deep and just kind of bumps into him. Turn 1, 25 million bikes trying to funnel into 3 inches of racetrack. It happens, so I'm not really too concerned about that. It's just two riders looking through the corner, small tap, and again, I think Pecco probably would agree that wasn't much in it, but I definitely see a bit of spiciness in the send into turn 6, because he kind of makes a decision and probably is a bit further back than he realizes, because he doesn't really make the apex, does kind of touch Pecco. And if you've seen some of the slow-mos as Pecco comes in, you can just see him kind of look across, and he kind of, as he gets a little nudge from Jorge. But what did you make of the sprint, especially between the two of them, and just the contact? Do you agree or disagree with my findings?
Was it not like turn 10 where they had the second piece of contact, like onto the straight? Or am I mistaken in that one? Rather than
I'm very sure it's 6, but while you're giving your verdict, I'll find out in the background.
Yeah, whatever. It doesn't make much difference because the corners are quite similar anyway in terms of the way you go for it. So, the start, there wasn't really any problem with that, because I don't even know if they did necessarily make full contact or just a little bit, but Martin was sort of just going to the corner and Bagnaia was just tipping in with his line. They just sort of met in the middle. One of those things, I don't think anyone's going to be that bothered about that, because Pecco just had to pick up a little bit. It didn't even really compromise him at all. It wasn't like a heavy hit, whereas, like you say, the next incident was more of a proper bit of contact. Like, he properly moved him out the way because he sent it. It was difficult because of how narrow the racing line was. You kind of had to pass close, and perhaps he misjudged it slightly there, but you get that into those turns. You kind of have a little bit of contact when you go in. It didn't look too bad initially, actually, just a little bit of touching, but from the other camera where you probably see, he kind of hits him like 2 or 3 times, really, like hits his shoulder, then like sort of his head, and like Pecco to look at him. So it was on the limit. Didn't really push him wide or anything, just a little bit of touching. You know, you're not gonna. Well, the stewards at Jerez might have given penalties for that, but generally you're not gonna give a penalty for anything like that. It's not that bad. It kind of happens when you race, and they're racing for a championship. We saw, dirty riding in Moto 3. It was nothing like that. So obviously we hadn't seen that at that point, but looking back on it now, obviously we've seen what dirty riding probably looks like. So I don't think it's really a problem. A little bit of contact. I don't think Bagnaia was particularly bothered about it when he was asked about it either. I think he pretty much said after as well. Martin's kind of started it now, so perhaps I'll give him a bit back. But yeah, I don't think there was much of a problem with it. Obviously, Martin has to risk everything. He has to beat Bagnaia. Bagnaia can't actually sit behind Martin, so of course Martin's going to be a bit more aggressive. He's got to go for it. So yeah, I don't think it's worth reading into too much. They seem okay as well. Obviously, I didn't realise how close friends they were in Moto 3 till sort of this weekend. All that footage has come out, and the little thing they've made and all the interviews they've done together, they seem to get on relatively okay, and seems like they probably still will. So yeah, a little bit of contact, but I wouldn't say particularly a problem.
You are correct. It was actually turn 10, but watching it back, I still had to watch it a few times. It wasn't until the exit of the corner that I realised. So it just shows that corner from certain camera angles looks identical, and Qatar being.
Remember this, guys. I was right. Dill was wrong.
Yeah. Bottom line is, we all know who won this episode. So unfortunately, I got it wrong, but pretty much agree. Yeah, it wasn't by any means dirty or aggressive. He goes for an overtake and a common over, and
it was aggressive.
It was aggressive, but it was fair. Like, I think there wasn't anything wrong with it. Again, it's modern day racing. I think there's nearly always context. It's just the size of these bikes these days are getting bigger. They're on a track that has at most 1.5 meters to 2 meters of racing line. You can't really give them that much space when you're passing, and Martin doesn't make the apex by any sense of the word, so unfortunately it does go a bit wide, and Pecco's kind of left just with a love tap. But like I said, they seem to both kind of brush it off, and like it was racing. They're kind of both happy with it, and it was good to see him actually getting close to each other, because we've had over the last 3-4 seasons championships where the first and second rarely come together on track. So it's actually good that we're seeing these last few rounds that they or throughout the season, because they battled a lot in Sachsenring as well and stuff. So it shows that even though it's gone down to the final race now and they've been close throughout the season, it's good to see they've had on-track battles, because we haven't seen a 2007 or 2008, 2009 year season where there's two riders throughout the season, week in, week out, going at each other. So it's good to see kind of recently that we've had the two kind of top men of the season fighting it out, maybe for 4th or 5th, but at least they're fighting against each other, which it's an interesting dynamic. But potentially dud tires in the sprint, and I'm going to add that to the main race now. We are recording this pretty much an hour maybe at this point after the race, so we're pretty much directly after, so we don't have any information on what happened to Martin in the main race. But it looks like potentially dud tire, according to Pecco. He kind of hinted at it. They're all kind of under contract with the teams and with Michelin that they can never kind of come out and just slate them. But they do all, they like to drop a kind of grain of sugar and salt there, just to kind of throw it into your head that maybe sometimes there's a dud tire, and it looked like potentially, judging by the fact that what Pecco did in the main race and what his sprint pace was just no. He said he had absolutely no rear grip. Luca Marini had very similar situation where he said after 4 laps his rear tire was done, which, with it being the hard rear tire, is very interesting. Do you think dud tire was an issue with either Pecco in the sprint, Martin in the main race, or do you just reckon it's ride-out devices and all the other gizmos kind of acting up again?
I think potentially it's possible, but we do get it every so often that you get a bit of a dud tire. It did seem like Bagnaia was obviously quite slow in the sprint. Obviously, wasn't as slow as Martin was in the main race, so maybe. I mean, I suppose one dud tire could be worse than another, or it could affect the rider worse. But obviously, he's not going to come out and say it. He's not going to say he had a dud tire. Perhaps he just didn't get the feeling from the tire. Sometimes if they've been through a heat cycle or something, that they're not the same, even though apparently they are the same chemically. The riders will say that they're not. They are different. So, yeah, I'm not sure exactly what's happening with Bagnaia in the sprint race. Potentially, he could have had a dodgy tyre. Obviously, like you said, Marini seemed to struggle with his tyre quite a bit. Martin was obviously fine in the sprint, but in the main race, he, even from the start, he almost high-sided off the grid, and then it was just terrible the whole time. Whether he had another issue, who knows, because we don't know at this point. So, yeah, I mean, obviously, I wasn't on the bike. I don't make the tyres, so I can't say for definite, but definitely a possibility of a dud tyre. But we have seen it. I think Valentino Rossi had one back at Silverstone, like 2021, so... And that's just the first example that comes to mind. But there's been plenty other times where people have said, yeah, that tyre didn't feel right. And it does happen. I mean, at the end of the day, they are made in batches. Obviously, they probably do have quality testing on them. But, sometimes perhaps it just doesn't quite work. Or, maybe they do something without realising it, like on the warm-up lap or something. And the tyre just kind of ruins the surface or something. I don't know. I don't know a lot about how tyres actually work inside. But, yeah, I mean, it's quite possible because... Marini, I'm not so sure. He got a podium in both races. I don't think he probably had anything wrong with his tyre in either race because it just seemed too fast for that to be a thing. He perhaps just perhaps didn't respond the way expected. Perhaps he just wasn't that happy with the feeling. But with him still being on the podium in the sprint, I don't think he had probably a dud tyre. But Bagnaia definitely could have done because he was obviously struggling a lot, which is unlike Bagnaia. But then we have seen that as well. He rides a bit tight, especially in the sprint races. So it's a handy excuse, right? If you're not outright saying it, you can kind of get away with it. So, yeah, potentially. It could have happened, could not have happened. Maybe it could just be the feeling with the tyre. You never know. It could be an electronic problem. They're probably going to be more likely going to try and blame the tyre than their own bike because, yes, they have contracts, but Ducati would rather you say Michelin's bad than Ducati's bad. So, yeah, I think it's possible, especially with Bagnaia, not so much Marini, but and obviously in the main race, I think there's definitely something wrong with Martin. Whether that was a dud tyre or another bike issue, I don't know, but there was definitely, he obviously wasn't right at all.
Jorge Martin was claimed that he was livid tonight, slams Michelin and stolen the world title is some of the words he's been used at the moment, so it pretty much confirms that he blames 100% Michelin for a dud rear tyre and slams that. Basically, they've
got the title fine for him.
So yeah, exactly. So not only has he pretty much lost one hand in the championship, or given one hand to Pecco on the championship, he's got a nice little fine for him and maybe the team as well for his conduct. But to explain to some people, I know a lot of people during the broadcast, I think Haji and Gavin Emmett were kind of speculating. Some people on social media were saying that the tyre might have spun on the rim. The reason that you kind of think your head goes right, the tyre just sits differently. So surely if it kind of gets another under load, it'll be fine. But the issue is a wheel has weights on it to balance out high and low spots in the tyre. If your tyre actually spins on the rim, the whole axis of it kind of moves across, which means the weight's in the wrong position. And what that will do is instead of dampening and kind of getting rid of vibrations, it will actually multiply them, meaning more. So if, now again, according to him, was a dud tyre. Whether it was a dud tyre because it spun on the rim off the line, we don't know. But just to kind of give a bit of a technical idea of exactly what would have happened if this tire did slightly move on the rim from such an aggressive start, and the way it kind of bucked and weaved and span. If it just rotated a couple of inch or a couple of mil, or degrees, which whatever you want to look at it, the wheel weights would have been completely out of position, and then it would have just given an imbalance in the rear wheel, and that would have been felt pretty much throughout the bike, especially at full lean, giving it a small bit of throttle. If it was a rear tire skipping a bit, it would just have felt horrible and would have given him very little confidence out of the corner. Throughout the track, it would have affected him, but it would have been especially bad on edge grip and stuff like that, because the tire would have just not been working with him, it wouldn't working against him. So that's just a kind of a quick and rough explanation of what could have been if the tire moved. For me, it's probably a dud tire. It's unlike, I'm not heavily against, I'm kind of a bit skeptical that it spun the rim, just because you would see chatter a bit more, and we saw a lot of Jorge Martin on track and on screen throughout the race because of him having issues, and we saw a lot of them, and I didn't see any. You would visibly see chatter on one of those bikes. You can see it a lot, really. So if it did move that much, you would have saw it a bit more, in my opinion. So that kind of maybe rules it out for me, that it probably didn't move on the rim. But a dud tires is kind of what he's going with, and it's a shame, really, because he gets the terrible start. He goes back to kind of P6, and then a massive gap opens up. Pecco leads, and we're all thinking, no, this is how the championship's going to end. And then for maybe halfway through the race, I was thinking maybe he's taking it really cautiously and he's going to come back at him. But then I was thinking, he's so far back, surely not. But it's just a sad, really, race today. Again, it just, this whole weekend has kind of been a bit, especially Sunday's just not been a great weekend, and we had issues on Saturday as well, which we'll cover in a bit. But it's just Moto3 left a sour taste in my mouth, and I'm a bit disappointed in the GP race, because of I'm quite neutral. I like Pecco, I like Jorge Martin. I'm not really leaning either way. It'd be nice to see Pecco get the title, because he's probably deserved it over the season. If I had to kind of pick one, I've always felt like, even after the incidents in Catalunya, I've kind of always been leaning slightly toward Pecco to get it, to bring it home, maybe just because he's been in this situation before. He's in the factory team, already been a champion, and so I always felt like maybe there was a slight advantage in his camp. And I just think this is probably taking the title out of Jorge Martin's hands, which is not the way you want to see it. You don't like to see championships decided by a technicality. You want to see it go down to Valencia, where they absolutely storm away in the final race of the season, and they're battling 1-2 the whole way to the finish line. That's decided in the last laps. That's how you want to see a title decided. So if we were, again, it's about roughly 2 hours now since the race has ended, I'd say, roughly. So in the next hours and days, we'll find out. We'll hear statements from Michelin. They'll definitely review the tyre. More than likely, they'll come out and say there's nothing wrong. It's rare, and at such high stakes, they're probably not going to come out and admit that it's wrong, even if I had it was a dud. So it's just a messy situation, unfortunately. It looks like that's going to be a massive deciding in the championships. Going to move on to something a bit more upbeat. Digi Antonio Delight was really quick in the sprint, had his front right height device, which I didn't think was a thing anymore, apparently stuck on for the first half a lap in the sprint. Explained his bad first lap. Maybe the information is incorrect, because I believe they're no longer on the bikes. It was ruled out last year, unless it's something that the rear right height device stuck the front down or something. But for whatever reason, one of the right height devices that was on the bike failed once again, surprise surprise, and he had basically no performance in the first half a lap. Went back off the start, got one of his worst starts, and battled back to P2. Could have won the sprint, did win the main race. Perfect weekend for Digi Antonio.
Well, a perfect weekend would have been a win in the sprint as well. But yeah, pretty much. I mean, he's been fast, hasn't he, for quite a while? Well, not quite a while, but the last few rounds. Basically since Phillip Island, pretty much since Marc Marquez signed on the dotted line. Digi has been very, very fast. Almost like, we'll turn your engine back up now that we've got Marquez secured. But yeah, he's been really fast. Obviously, I think he had a bit of a bad weekend at Malaysia. Maybe not bad, but a bit of a weaker weekend. But even from Friday, he was looking quick. Qualified on the front row. You know, he has done that before, but, you know, on this form, it's like, you know, he might be able to compete in the race. Obviously, so close to winning in the sprint, just not able to pass Martin. And in the main race, him and Bagnaia were miles clear of everybody else. And I'm so happy that Digi won. So happy for him, because it's, this is probably, he's not got a MotoGP right at the moment, so this could be his last chance to win a MotoGP race ever, and he's took it. So, hats off to him, because not a lot of riders have won MotoGP races. There's been some fantastic riders over the years that haven't won MotoGP races. Colin Edwards always comes to mind with that one, that he never managed to win one. So there's lots of riders throughout their careers that have never managed to win one, especially these ones that get sort of chewed up and spit out quite quickly, like Lequona, for example, was only in the class for a couple of years before he got sort of dropped, a bit similar to Digi, and he's managed to bring home a win, and I think that does change things for him a little bit. But yeah, just great to see, because he looked fast. He's been looking fast the last few rounds. He's such a nice guy. Glad to hear as well that it's kind of, well, not actually glad in a way, almost a little bit disappointed to hear that it was just a setup change that's changed these things. They could have made this change a lot earlier. They've kind of gone away from the Ducati setup, and it's working for Digi really well. Do want to touch on the sprint race. Obviously, like you say, he had his front ride height device stuck on for a little bit. I believe they're still allowed to use them on the start. I think it's actually around the lap they're not allowed them anymore. Because I thought that too, to be honest, when I heard it. But I thought that they do. The front does drop down as well on the start. So I think they are still allowed them for the start of the race. Because if you actually look at them when they're on the grid, they're really low front and rear. But if you look at them during the race, it's only the rear that lowers down. So yeah, I think that's where it was outlawed. I think it was outlawed for the rest of the race, but quite frankly, get rid of a lot of them, as far as I'm concerned, for the start, for everything. And I think that is something that's actually being talked about by the sounds of it. But yeah, back to Digi Antonio. Just what a weekend for him. Yeah, not quite perfect because he didn't win the sprint as well, but he came so close. And then to actually bring home the win in Qatar, just great. And I feel sorry for the guy that obviously is losing his MotoGP seat. Obviously, we're seeing online a lot that he deserves a seat, and obviously, yeah, race winner he does. But he lost his seat when he was finishing P17 every weekend. It's not like he was winning the races then and he got sacked, and it's really unfair. He wasn't delivering, hadn't delivered for a year and a half, lost his job. Obviously, they've now found this step. Maybe getting fired did light a fire a little bit as well, because that does happen to some riders. And he has been really good now, and it'd be good to see him maybe in contention for that VR46 seat or the Repsol seat, depending on how it goes. But it doesn't look like he's probably going to stay in MotoGP. He's probably going to go somewhere else, World Superbikes maybe, although most of the seats are gone there as well. Maybe Ducati would open up somewhere for him potentially. I don't know, but yeah, either way, regardless of his future, great to see the guy win. Really, really happy for him. Nice to see Grassini winning as well. 2 back-to-back wins now for Grassini at Qatar, so back-to-back wins. So yeah, just great for Digi, and a really well-ridden race as well. Like, goes without saying, it's pretty difficult to pass Bagnaia, and to just sit right behind him like that and make the pass it's just clinical. And he looks really good on the bike now as well. He just looks like a really good MotoGP rider at this point.
Yeah, it's just shame it happened what happened. And again, I think we all agree, it's just, we all kind of ponder why it took him that long to take a risk. If you're that lost, you throw the ball and you hope, and you throw the dice and hope you come out on top. It's silly, and don't want to come across bad on Frankie Carcetti, but it seems pretty small and kind of boxed minded that it took them to be basically out of his job before he goes, right, well, we've tried everything within A to B in terms of Ducati's how to make a setup in this bike. We might as well try something different. So surely in
fairness to Carcetti, he is still learning the Ducati, so potentially maybe he's like, okay, well, let's try something else. Maybe once he understands the bike a little bit more, he can say, let's try this. But I suppose it's difficult, and Digi's crew chief last year was a rookie crew chief, so maybe there is part of that. But yeah,
true. Maybe if Carcetti, I suppose, is learning it, maybe he's been overridden in the team in terms of setup, and maybe it's not down to him. So again, we'll just kind of put the kind of blunt of the blame, I suppose, at Grassini, that it's a bit silly that they waited until, not even waited, like, but if week in, week out he's saying, well, I don't have this feeling, I don't have that feeling, and like, they made good progress in the pre-season test. He was actually quite quick at the start of the season until a bad crash in Portimao, and he got kind of beaten up, a bit of an egg beater crash, and that kind of set him back a bit, so that kind of cost him a decent start to the season. And it's just a shame that it took them to the point where he was completely out of the job before he goes, well, we might as well try something completely out of the box here, and then it works. So it just seems a bit single-minded from the team, to be honest. But I've never doubted he's had talent. I've just always thought that he's missing something, and it clearly was that it was a setup change, and in the end he's like, to be honest, even if he stayed with the team, I don't know how well he'd do next year. I don't think next year he's going to be multiple race winner, podium championship contender. I just think that he'd probably be more like Alex Marquez next year. He'd be a lot closer to him. So I think it's a shame. But even if he signs for Honda, that's like he's a very kind of confidence sensitive rider, is what I'd say. So when things are going bad, he doesn't look like he's enjoying it. It doesn't come easy. Whereas when things are going well, like right now, he looks like he is top of the world. So signing for a Honda that has no front end and throws you off for sitting on it incorrectly, it's just it probably wouldn't be a great decision, even if it was to keep him in the championship. And the VR46 thing, I don't think they're too keen on him, which is a shame because he's proven that he can win on that bike and he's proven that he's quick, so maybe he deserves another chance, and maybe then he goes to another team and things work a bit better. So you never know. It's hard to tell, but unfortunately it looks like he's been chewed out and spit out again, so it's probably the end of the road for DJ, which is a bit of a shame. Moving on to the man he beat into P1 and got P2, Pecco, who tried his best to give the victory to stablemate Luca Marini with the turn 1 incident with Digia on 4 laps ago, I believe. Pecco, great launch, unlike Jorge Martin, gets the lead, controls the race for about 95% of it, loses it with 3 laps to go. What would you consider was the mistake from Pecco? Did you think that did you have just quicker? Did you think Pecco was thinking P2 is perfect, I don't need to win this? Or was it just a kind of matter of if Pecco didn't run wide in turn 1, he probably fights back?
I think the race start, if we go back to that, it was like a Martin kind of race, right? He got a really good start, got to the front, just controlled it from there. And I know Bagnaia done that plenty of times himself, and that's kind of his strategy, but it is trademark Martin to be aggressive at the start, get the lead, and then just control it from there. And I suppose that's, Bagnaia seen that work quite a few times now when he's been on the other end of it. So he's obviously decided to do that. And like I said, I know he's done it before, but that's actually where probably some of Bagnaia's best wins have come that way. But Bagnaia tends to stretch a little bit more. He doesn't tend to just sit right in front, whereas Martin does do that quite regularly. He can stretch, but also he can have someone right behind him for the whole race and be fine. But the thing with Bagnaia is, I don't think he had the pace to match Digi anyway. I think Digi was quicker. Digi just struggled to pass him for a long time. I think that was the problem. Obviously, Bagnaia is so good on the brakes, it makes it very, very difficult to overtake him. And Digi Antonio just finally I think Bagnaia made a couple of little mistakes. I think that's what Digi said, and it just got him right to the back of him, because I noticed throughout the race as well, out of the last corner, Bagnaia was getting much better traction than Digi, and it just kept Digi out of range to pass him down towards turn 1. I think if Digi could have got the same launch off the corner that Bagnaia did, he just slipstreamed him and probably just leveled him on the brakes at turn 1 and made the pass, but he couldn't do that. So he had to try and find a creative way to do it. Obviously did it into the first of the fast rights. Fantastic move as well, by the way, from Digi. But yeah, I think generally it just looked like he was quicker. The fact that he could kind of keep the gap there, and even when Bagnaia pulled away a little bit, he caught back up. And obviously Bagnaia pulled away from Marini initially, so Digi came through, overtook obviously Alex Marquez and Marini to sort of be at the front of that train, and then sort of closed the little 4 or 5 tenths gap that Bagnaia had, and then obviously went away with him. But I think Bagnaia, I don't think he had anything. Obviously, he really did try, like you say, to give the win away. He almost took them both out to turn 1, and we saw it with Pol Espargaro here last year. It's very easy to do that. As soon as you get overtaken, just run straight on. It's the first corner, especially when a Gracini Ducati overtakes you, it seems. It's very easy to get sucked in and run off. But he was lucky, in a way, that there's not gravel there, because if there's gravel there where he ran off, then all of a sudden Martin takes the lead in the championship, I think. So yeah, it was a bit sketchy, and you can see the Ducati guys have had their hearts in their mouths. But I think even if he keeps the position, even if he doesn't run off the track, I think he struggles to get that pass. Maybe he has one go, but honestly, at that position, it's not worth going for it, because Digi has nothing to lose. Digi's going to go for the win. He's not going to get another chance to do this, unless he does it next week, obviously, but you know what I mean. So there'd be no point really fighting him that hard for 5 points, which, yes, 5 points is crucial, but when you're gaining 20, and you're going to go into the finale with a big points margin, why risk everything you've got for an extra 5 points? Agora could tell you that doesn't work out very well. So I managed to bring it up every podcast at this point. I still can't believe that. But yeah, I just don't think that he had the pace anyway. I think Digi just looked better, probably looked better on the tyres, and once he got past, I think he would have just probably pulled away, because he just looked a lot quicker. That was Bagnaya's chance, really, back at Turb 1, because, like I said, I think out of the last corner, that was the only place that Bagnaya was solidly better than Digi Antonio. But obviously, with that mistake, that completely nullified that as a potential opportunity for him to re-overtake. And yeah, he brought him second place. That's what he needed to do. But yeah, like you say, he almost threw it away. He almost bottled it, which we have seen him do in these situations before.
It was crazy because we were on board with him, and you just see the close he's been. He got such run. You're like, Jesus, this is interesting. And then you see him like, it's like not even go over. It's like he went for it, but then it was literally like alongside his swing arm, and you're like, oh my god, he's not going to do it, is he? And then as he kind of slides behind the kind of saddle box of the Brando Digi's Ducati, it cuts to a shot, and he's like shaking his head as he goes on. It cuts to the Ducati camp, and the Ducati bosses are just literally frozen in time, staring and just like, I can't believe he's done this. And it was stress all over the place for it, and he runs wide and he's shaking his head, and I'm still thinking, Jesus Christ, imagine the amount of sand that's on that kind of painted piece out there, and he's getting his knee down on like...
He got his knee down, didn't he? It was crazy.
We've seen people crash in long laps for getting their knee down because it's on rubber tracks. So like it was, even then it felt like, geez, he's still not out of it, and then he gets back on. I'm thinking, surely Luca will catch him, but I was like, surely Luca then will play the VR46 game of keeping everyone's eggs happy, I suppose. And he, in the end, Pecco gets back and seems to get back to a decent speed and probably falls about 4 seconds behind, but it was crazy. And to go back to the start of the race, brilliant from him. It was, if like I was thinking throughout the race, because a lot of times when there's a bit of a lull in the race and it's kind of building towards something, I'm kind of already thinking of the kind of points I'm going to make in the podcast. And I was thinking, this is the most clinical we've seen Pecco since Austria, where we banged on that he was probably one of the best riders on the grid at the time and that he was so good that weekend. But it's just the fact that he made his mind up straight away. He said on Saturday that Martins, after kind of opening up the battles because of the moves he put on him, so straight away into turn one, went slightly aggressive, and then ran a few other people a bit wide to make sure he got the lead. Luca kind of looked at him again, but that was it. And all the way up until an inspired Fabio Di Gianantonio passed him. That was Pecco's best race, probably one of the best races he's done all season, because of the fact that he lost a good chunk of points on Saturday, maybe to a dud tire, but again, never really have it in paper and in set in stone whether it was or not. But the fact of the matter is, I think Pecco himself knew, and is that level of experience now, that he knew that Saturday was a one-off, that it wasn't that his pace wasn't there, and he felt like in his post-race interview that he felt Saturday should have been the same as what he did today. He should have been able to battle Martin and not lose as many points. So I think he came into Sunday thinking, well, Martin's going to have a tough job to recreate his Saturday, and I can only go forward. So I think he came in with an open mind and positive, and I think really we've seen a brilliant Pecco today. And again, made one mistake under, again, it was more the fact he got sucked into the braking zone by a bit of slipstream, lack of aero resistance from being behind another bike. So again, we kind of get dragged into the situation of ride-out devices, aero, Michelin. So it's kind of week in, week out. It's getting a bit messy now with all this stuff. But thankfully, there was no contact. Thankfully, Digi managed to win it after getting a brilliant race and getting the overtake. But it was so close between the two of them. Someone else we haven't really given much time over the last, probably the season really, Fabio Quartararo. We are missing so much by him being on a Yamaha and not being at the front of the grid. Because Jorge Martin was kind of in the lower top 10 positions, and Fabio having podium pace on time trial kind of style races, Fabio came forward, past Marquez, past Jorge Martin with a beautiful move into turn 10. He was so good. And it just made me think, I remember his 21 season, and I remember him last year putting moves in the chicane at Austria on Miller on the Ducati, and there's just so much that we miss having. It's kind of the same as having Marquez on Honda. There's just so much that the two of them are just box office, and we're just unfortunately not getting to see him. And I'm really hoping that either Yamaha sort their bike out or he gets a contract somewhere else, because he's too good not to be at the front of the grid. I feel like maybe next year in Superbikes it could be the same with Top Rack. If the BMW isn't cutting the mustard, it'll be a damn shame for him not to be at the front if it does go that way. But Fabio for me is just, he is right up there with Marquez. I put him still above Martin, Pecco, Binder, and Bastianini. So I still put him up there really close on a pedestal, pretty much almost at the level of Marquez, maybe at the level of Marquez. We won't really know until they're kind of given decent equipment. But do you think I'm getting a bit ahead of myself with Fabio, or am I making some sense?
No, I think that sounds about right. He's pretty much the only rider that's anywhere near Marcus's level, in my opinion, anyway. Yeah, Binder's not bad, but Binder you go kind of a bit back and forth on because I feel like Marquez on that KTM, Qatar on that KTM has snuck a win at this point,
Yeah.
whereas Binder hasn't. I think he's kind of that little level behind it. Like he's good. He also makes these mistakes as well, like a lot. Like he's aggressive, but then he also messes up the passes quite regularly. So yeah, I think Binder's probably lacking that a little bit. But yeah, Fabio, I think it's worth giving Yamaha a little bit of props. They've clearly made a step in these last few rounds. Ever since pretty much like India, they've been much more competitive. They've been much closer to the front of the field and on times. Like this season, even like the race runs, they've not looked that great. I mean, they've been not bad, but you know they're not topping like an FP4. I know FP4 doesn't exist anymore, but you know what I mean. Was like FP2? I think is the actual session. That's the same thing now. But like they weren't topping FP4s, whereas the last few rounds they have been, and Morbidelli's also been up there, topping the times with him in terms of the actual long run pace, and he's had some decent races of late. I think he's had. Where did he finish today? Was he 6th, 5th, something like that?
I can tell you now, he was P7.
P7. Okay, so not quite as good as I thought, but he wasn't too bad in the sprint. I can't remember where he finished the sprint actually, but he was pretty good at Malaysia. That's what I'm thinking. I think he finished like 5th there. He came through the pack. Like it's clear the Yamaha is able to overtake a little bit more than previously. That like I think he's making it work. Even Morbidelli, because Morbidelli was looking pretty good at Malaysia as well. Obviously, I know Fabio makes the difference with the passes a lot of the time, but it seems like it's just a little bit more competitive. They've been saying this weekend, and it seems like they've made a step with the ride height device, the rear ride height device, because the Yamaha have actually been sort of mid-teens on the top speed rather than right at the bottom. So I think that's just it. I think they're not quite getting as gapped on the straights by the Ducatis, maybe not getting blasted by from quite as far behind. They could stay within contention, and Fabio could use his talent to make the difference. Really, it's just missing the qualifying pace, which I don't understand why it's not there. If it's got the race pace, I don't get why it's not got the qualifying pace, but it seems like they just don't find as much time as the V4s with the soft tyre. And it basically ruins the weekend. If you're starting at 12th place, that's it. You're not getting through. The only way that happens if you have a crazy race like Mandalika, for example, where obviously he managed to get up to the podium from starting a bit further back. Although, again, there, I think he qualified pretty well. So, yeah, I think it's worth kind of giving a little bit of props there. They have definitely been more competitive since like India onwards. So he's been featuring more in the top 10. And remember earlier on in the season, he was like, they were literally like 18th, 19th quite a lot, and they're pretty far down, and they weren't scoring points in the sprint. Whereas he's solidly in the top 10 every weekend now, which I know is not good still for a world champion rider like we see with Marquez as well, but they're definitely a bit more closer to it, and we're seeing a bit more of him, and we're seeing these passes. And I think you're absolutely right. He's going to be really annoyed next year because he's going to see Marc Marquez, someone that I think Mark and Fabio both pretty much see each other as being very similar in terms of talent. I think they've battled a little bit off camera that we haven't seen as well, with being a bit further down the order. They've been pulling some passes, and Marquez has said stuff as well, like, oh, you should see some of the passes Fabio's pulling back here, and I think Fabio said similar things about Mark. And if you go back to 2019, they were battling quite a lot the second half of the season. They were battling to the last lap, like every race. I think they both know how good the other one is, if that makes any sense. Like they both know they're really good, and they're probably better than everybody else. And it's going to be really annoying for him to see Marquez on a Ducati, someone that he can battle with, probably cleaning up with the championship, and seeing Morbidelli on a Ducati doing semi-well, someone that he's destroyed for his entire MotoGP career effectively. Like, other than the, half a season they weren't teammates, and 2020 was a bit rough, I guess, for Fabio, but other than that, you know, he's pretty much destroyed Morbidelli every season. Like, it's not even been close, and it's going to be hard for him next year to see those two riders, someone that he sees himself as similar as, someone that he sees himself as probably definitely better than, knows that he can destroy on the same equipment, doing well. It's going to be painful for him. Hopefully, the Yamaha does make a step because, like I said, they have improved in these last few rounds, so obviously they're on the right path, and potentially, you know, starting from fresh, starting a new season with this improvement in performance, there's a bit more to fight for, and maybe they can do a bit more, but it's just a qualifying pace now. If they can solve that, I think the bike is actually not that bad. It's not like the Honda. I think the pace can be there for the bike if it's extracted. So, Yeah, I'd like to see him on a Ducati or an Aprilia or something just a bit better, although the Aprilia has its own problems. But yeah, it is a shame. It is a shame not to see him at the front because last year's pulling off some heroics. Obviously, 2021 he was as well. But it just, you think back now, you look at like where that bike is this year, and you think back to last year. How is he pulling out some of those performances? It's just beyond belief.
But I'd actually like to see, to be honest, right, and it's unlikely to happen. I'd actually like to see him stay with Yamaha, but we lose the aero bit and get rid of the ride-out device. I think that brings Yamaha right back into the picture, and I think then we get to see. So still, I really like him on the Yamaha. And I really like the whole kind of color scheme. I like the Diablo on the back of the suit and everything. That it looks nice on the Yamaha. And I think he's kind of. We had the Rossi years, we had the Lorenzo years, then we had the Rossi Maverick kind of partnership, and he came on and kind of took the mantle from them and took that team to another level again. And I still think like that for years. Marquez and Honda, I think we could have years of Quartararo, Yamaha. I think Pecco, Ducati, Binder, KTM. So it could just be a nice collaboration throughout the season. I think it's getting closer to the point we might lose the ride-out devices on a safety ground because with the current agreement in GP, I think I've said this on multiple podcasts, but if something wants to be changed, so for example, we'll say, just for reference, ride-out devices, rare ride-out devices, if all the teams vote for that to go, perfect, no problem, they're gone, nobody bats an eyelid. But if one team doesn't agree, we're going to say Ducati because it will be Ducati because they've spent millions getting this tech before anyone else. They've came up with the idea, everyone else has copied it, copying their homework for want of a better phrase. So they're obviously not going to give away their baby and give away tech that is definitely giving them an advantage. It's just making them a lot quicker. You saw how Pecco got out of that last corner. Pecco is brilliant at using the ride-out device to his advantage. So it's a massive advantage. It's a massive gap that they have to everyone else. Even though KTM and everyone else has it, the gap still, you still think that just with the engine, just with the ride-out device, with all their Venturi Aero devices they have on that bike, it just ties in to be that project of amazing results wherever we go in the world. So if they don't agree to it, that's it. They can't force Ducati to agree to it. But if it can be kind of angled on a safety ground, they do not need to include the teams. It will be banned immediately, straight away, no question. And I think the fact that ever since they've come in, I can think of like easily 7, 8. I could probably, if I spend a minute, I could probably think of more than double digits how many times they've failed in races and how many different times we've talked about them. So, like when they first came in, people are saying, "Oh, it makes the bike safer out of the corner," but it doesn't really, because what it does is make the bikes more dangerous on entry because of the extra speed, the load, and everything else. And it's clearly putting Michelin under savage pressure. It's not helping the racing. It's not going to be tech. I know GP kind of gets away with being, because it's a prototype, it doesn't need to kind of have a feedback to being on, like, it doesn't need to be on the V4R on the road, or the V4S or whatever the road variant is. I think you can get the R for the road as well. But the whole point is that, fair enough, in superbikes you don't want the stupid tech because you're never going to see it on the road. It will have no benefit on the road, whereas GP kind of is the prototype and you can kind of try things with GP. And to be fair, we've had this era now of aero and this ride-out devices and these crazy lap times and crazy top end speeds. I think they need to take it back a bit. Going to 850, 800cc engines is wrong. We tried that. It failed. It was shocking. There's no question. All it did was make them peaky in power, and they just improved in corner speed, and it made them not enjoyable to ride for the riders, which at the end of the day, it is their job at the end of the day. You don't want to make bikes that aren't nice to ride. And they weren't really amazing in terms of battles. They were just meh. When we back to the thousands for 13, it was a good step. And to be honest, if you go from 13 through to, we'll say 18, 19, we had good years there of racing. Whereas 19 to now, World Superbikes has absolutely dominated in terms of kind of probably just kind of with the overall pound for pound champions in terms of battling. And of course, you have to mention BSB and that. And you could probably throw Moto America in there really if you want to kind of get deep down into it. But I just think overall, that is one of the biggest issues. And I'm still talking here about Fabio in a way with Yamaha, that if you bring it all back, we still have Fabio at the front if there isn't as many of these gizmos. Again, I'll kind of throw back to you to see what you think, but I'm fairly sure I already know the answer.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, you kind of take the gizmos away, it's about the bike again, rather than, these extras. That helps the Honda as well. Because I think ultimately their core, I think bike-wise, they're not that bad. Like, if you look at their problems, it's like the Honda, for example, doesn't have a very good front end. But if you take the ride height device off, all of a sudden there's not as much pressure going through that front end, and perhaps the bike is a bit more competitive, and it's not you're not crashing it quite as much. And the Yamaha, its kind of problem is like it also can't break that deep, which I guess when it's gone up against these bikes with really good rider devices, that makes it difficult. Obviously, it doesn't get off the corner. Well, actually, it does get off the corner quite well. But it's sort of that top end and that extra little bit of maybe pushing the tire into the ground and qualifying. So I think you take off these gizmos. I think the ride height device doesn't ultimately all of a sudden bring Yamaha and Honda back into it like completely, because I think they're still lacking in other areas like the aero. I think it probably helps. It probably actually helps Honda more than Yamaha, quite honestly, because Yamaha seems to have got theirs pretty well dialed in now. If it's to be believed that they're doing a little bit better. I mean, it helped Yamaha on the straights a little bit, but I think it'll make the Honda a bit more rideable. But I think the Yamaha's a pretty good bike, so if you actually take some of these extra bits away, it definitely brings it back in, 100%, because the bike is still good. If you take off like those side skirts off of the Ducati, the Yamaha just turns underneath it. Like, it's still so good. Whereas you whip the aero, if you whip all the aero off all the bikes, the Yamaha is gone. Like, it is completely gone. Like, no one sees which way it goes, because the Yamaha still turns really well without the aero. Pretty quicker on the straights without the aero, quite honestly, because it's not got so much drag. So yeah, I think if you got rid of all that stuff, the Yamaha, 100%, it's best bike. You're clamoring to get on a Tech 3 again, like back in the day.
Yeah.
Like, even got on a satellite Yamaha was unbelievable back then. You could have a couple of podiums a year on that, back in that era. But yeah, I think taking away those gizmos definitely helps Yamaha. Also probably helps Honda as well.
As well as, more importantly, regardless of what rider you support, what team you support, it helps the show. And at the end of the day, we all, like, I spend way too much time watching races from like 2002 and 2004 and 2008 and stuff, and just the way the bikes move around. And again, like, between the two of us, we watch BSB, we watch the occasional Moto America race when they're streamed on YouTube. They're a bit of fun, and it's just when they move around a bit more, it just is a bit more, it feels more authentic, it feels a bit more what we're used to. Whereas these, like, if you watch a GP bike, if you just literally watched an outside shot of Jorge Martin, the thing doesn't move. It might drift into turn one a small bit on some tracks. It is so stable, it is so low, it is, I suppose in a way it's an amazing feat of engineering, but that doesn't mean that they're amazing in terms of racing. I think Formula 1 have probably struggled when maybe like the 2018, 2017, where they had really wide and big tyres and stuff like that. And again, lap times were like ridiculous. They broke every record under the sun, but there was about 3 overtakes in the whole season. So again, we're kind of going down that route of, we had a brilliant formula, and Ducati with all these money have kind of pushed the boundary out, and we've kind of gotten to a point now where they've kind of pulled the rug out from everyone else, and they have this whole championship to themselves nearly at this point. But was it like top 5 yes in the sprint? Like today there was so many of them. Again, Binder doing
on the grid as well.
So again, it just shows that bike is, with everything going on. And I think you made a good point there of Honda, Yamaha come forward, but the big thing you didn't kind of mention is, if you take away the gizmos with the Ducati, that Ducati is back to being what Valentino dumped in 2012, 2011, and jumped onto his Yamaha again. It goes back to being a nervous bike with an amazing engine that can't put the power down, that doesn't turn naturally, and they do okay at Mugello, they'll do well at Austria, but then they're missing for the rest of the year. It's the fact that they have all these aero devices. Now, again, throughout the end of the Davi, start to the Miller, start to Pecco era, it was kind of like they always kept saying that year on year the bike started to turn more, but that was as more aero developed on the bike. So I still don't think that Ducati turns on natural chassis wise as well as a Yamaha. And Aprilia probably is in the same boat with being kind of more of a, just the way their geometry set up, it's more like an inline 4v4. And to be honest, Aprilia is a bit of weird because they kind of have both issues. They're quick around the track. They have the V4, but they're not kind of king of anything. So I think we see why Aprilia.
Yarles, like today,
exactly.
Like how much he struggled to pass people, and yesterday as well. Same thing. He couldn't pass Bagnaia. Like he basically is level with them going into the braking zone, and then he's completely behind them by the time he actually gets the apex. So
yeah. It's like he keeps shadowing them, and when he does go for the move, you're like, oh my god, he's actually going for it. To be honest, it's a bit of a Maverick trait. He's never been.
Yeah, that's true.
When he was with Yamaha alongside Valentino, it really showed that he was never able to do. He could never match Valentino in terms of overtaking, and like a lot of the 17 season after Maverick kind of lost his way, Maverick would qualify on the front row and Valentino would beat him in the race. And I think 18 it kind of went on like that as well, where for the most part Maverick would do way better throughout the weekend, and then Valentino would come back on him during the race, and you'd see him a lot closer, and Valentino could get more out of it in terms of it on a Sunday, which is where the points are. So I still think even now on the Aprilia, and I think again it's because the Aprilia is the V4 Yamaha that we kind of all think it is. So I think he jumped on the Aprilia and he probably thought to himself, "Job, I've got myself a version of a Ducati without the big Ducati sign on it." So I think he probably thought he was getting into something a bit different, but really it's a V4 Yamaha at its core, and it does a lot of things amazing. I think that's why when we go to a track on Friday, they're so quick because it does work well. But when the Ducatis start to crunch the numbers and they all start coming back and the KTMs kind of understand a bit more and get a bit dialed in, I think they start to go backwards, and that's why we kind of see him a bit off the kind of front at the end of the race. But we're going to move now to just a couple more bits before we get to the end of the podcast. We're going to jump from one Aprilia rider to the other. We're going to end it with a positive after this, but a late incident. It's been a messy weekend. Probably the most messy weekend I've remembered for a while for this sort of stuff. Rhys, I suppose you can take it away and kind of give the in-depth analysis of the whole situation, really, and how his weekend played out.
Well, he's had a pretty rough couple of weekends, right? I mean, in Malaysia, he had like about 4 crashes in a day, 4 or 5 crashes on Friday, which wasn't great. And the rest of the weekend really didn't pick up from that. I think did he crash out the race as well? If I
think he retired correctly, or it's crashed.
Okay, fair enough. So yeah, it wasn't looking good for him there. Obviously, jumped to this weekend. Similar kind of thing. I think he still crashed on Friday. Then was it Saturday? Was it Saturday morning that this happened? Or
end of FP3.
Yeah, he comes across. In fact, actually, I think he's going around, and Morbidelli comes across him. Morbidelli makes a pass on him, which he's entitled to do. Yeah, it's a bit annoying if you go for a lap time, I guess, that someone's overtaken you. But again, within the right, they go side by side. It's through turn 4 that he makes the pass. They go side by side through 5, up the run towards 6. Morbidelli pretty much gets fully in front at this point. The wheels are still side by side. Some people say that Morbidelli was then coasting, but I don't think he was. I think he was still going for it. Perhaps maybe take a different line to Aleix. But basically, Aleix then sends it up the inside of Morbidelli. Brakes probably too late anyway, like straight up on the dirty part of the track a little bit as well. So kind of the bike starts to wobble. He has to release the brakes. Then he just runs them both off the circuit. So really, Morbidelli's once been aggrieved here because he's been run off the circuit. But Aleix starts doing the typical Aleix, really throwing his arms around, getting all irate because he's a very fiery character. We've seen him do it many, many times. Morbidelli sort of pulls alongside him to say, like, calm down, stop getting so angry. And Aleix then just smacks him on the visor and then sort of like rides off from him, which, you can't do. You can't lay your hands on somebody else, wave your arms around them all you want, even kick out at them, which is frowned upon as well. But if you're not actually making contact, then, it's more of a gesture. It's not an intent, kind of thing. I mean, even that, it's frowned upon, shouldn't do it. But if you just kick out someone a little bit, then, that's not so bad, or wave your hand towards them. But to actually, like, go and deliberately make contact with him, like smack him on the head, yeah, all right, didn't hurt Morbidelli, of course. It's not like that. But that's not the point. It's the fact that it's dangerous. You need to have the respect, and doing it on a live track as well. Somebody else could be coming around. I know they were sort of off the track, but you're not paying attention. And what if like it did sort of like make Morbidelli sort of crash because it kind of unexpected him, kind of caught him off guard. We've seen in the past celebrations go wrong. I remember, I think it might have been 2020 Moto 2, the 2 Sky VR46 bikes tried to sort of high five each other, ended up knocking each other off.
Yeah.
Very easily done. And, if he pushes Morbidelli's face, Morbidelli falls off his bike, he falls into the circuit. And, someone's going around on a hot lap, could be a terrible accident. So that's the thing. Like, yes, all right, it wasn't like he like beat him up or anything like that. It wasn't like fisticuffs in the gravel like we've seen John McPhee and Jeremy Alcoba do a few years ago. But just needless as well, because you're battling someone like FP2. It's not worth anything. Like, it's pretty ridiculous. Like, because it's not even the session that gets you through either, because that's on Friday. So literally, basically, just pushed like kind of punched Morbidelli. Well, I didn't punch him, I guess. Slapped his helmet for like no reason. Just made himself look a bit silly, unneeded. Also makes himself look a bit silly, getting angry about an incident that was his own fault as well. And yeah, he then got a sixth place penalty and a €10,000 fine, which obviously not really much to him. You're a factory of Aprilia money, you're not exactly short 10,000, but it's nice for the charity, I guess, that it goes to at the end of the year. And just the sixth place penalty, maybe not enough. I mean, like I said, the John McPhee Alcoba incident, for example, they got pit lane starts and penalties in terms of seconds on top of that. So, maybe starting from the pit lane, for example, because what kind of example is that setting as well to the other people? We had the Asia Talent Cup guys there this weekend. Not that it matters whether they're there or not, but you've got these riders. They're there. They're probably watching them. They're obviously watching the MotoGP race. They're watching the MotoGP riders. They all of a sudden think, oh, well, if someone annoys me on track, I'm going to give them a slap or whatever. And you just can't do it just because it's just dangerous, isn't it? Like, in terms of it, like I said, obviously, it's not really caused any injury to Morbidelli at all, but that's not the point. It's just unsportsmanlike as well, and that's part of it. It's just, why do it? Like, it just, I mean, maybe you could have had a back of the grid penalty, but just a silly incident overall. Aleix not made himself look great, and then his weekend just got worse from that because he got knocked off on the first lap of the sprint. He's fractured his is it his fibula or the top of that he's
top of the fib, I believe. Yes.
Yeah, top of the fib. So he fractured that, and then pretty much probably only started the race to take his penalty. I would imagine, to make sure it wasn't carried over to the next round, or next race that he does. And he obviously retired pretty early on. So terrible weekend for him. Obviously, not great what happened to him in the race. And also, actually worth noting, Oliveira also now out for the rest of the season, broke his shoulder blade in that accident. So we do wish Oliveira a speedy recovery. I haven't actually got it in the notes, but we'll also talk about that incident that happened in the sprint. But yeah, Aleix just doesn't come out looking very good. And I think in terms of these last few flyaways, it's been a messy couple of weekends. He just needs to kind of get his head down in Valencia, have a good weekend and reset over the winter, because he had a really good middle part of the season, but these last few rounds, he's just seemed really, really flustered and annoyed about different things, and he just needs to chill out, because it's not on to be slapping at the riders, disrespectful, going in, shouting at the marshals that he's been doing as well, shouting at his team, just needs to calm down a little bit.
Yeah, and to mention Oliveira there to start, he did cause the incident in the sprint. He has been given a long lap penalty for the next race, but he's going to miss the rest of the season. So when we come back to Qatar for the start of 24, he's going to have a penalty there for that weekend. So just a heads up as a long distance penalty, unfortunately for him. So again, we wish him a speedy recovery. His season probably couldn't end fast enough after all the incidents and bad luck he's had. So unfortunately, he's going to start next year again, as he ended this year, kind of probably a bit banged up and getting penalised for others' mistakes. And this time it was his mistake, unfortunately. But it's been a rough season. On Aleix, a pit lane start is the only thing for me. I see, because the rule, you have to follow the rules in some sense. I would have penalised them heavily here, but also penalised them somehow in Valencia. So pit lane start here and a double long lap penalty maybe in Valencia, because there's no point in giving him a pit lane start and double long, because you can only penalise him so much in that race. If he's getting a pit lane start, he ain't doing much in that race. So there's kind of no point putting extra 2 points or 2 penalties on top of that. So to go and put him on another penalty in Valencia, that kind of ruins that weekend as well, and just really, really clamps down to show that it's not okay, because we've seen this instance before. I believe Casey Stoner and Hector Barber kind of give him a little punch in his arm, and I don't remember what Casey got for that at the time. I think it was just a fine at the time for that one, but it's not acceptable. It's really, really bad, and Frankie has said a lot of things in the media about him. Aleix seems to be getting pretty odd, or something about what he said about his kids. Now, again, I'm going to be honest, I reckon that's probably taken out of context and maybe lost in translation. I don't think Morbidelli would go after Aleix's kids over an incident on track. From my understanding, what he said essentially was that throughout Aleix's career, he's had more of these negative moments than good moments. It's kind of the bottom line of what I've seen. Like Morbidelli's title of his opinion, but it was just messy. And then the penalty actually puts him on the back same grid spot next to Morbidelli. And on the way to the sprint into the last corner, Aleix sits Morbidelli up for no reason. It was picked up on screen and it was kind of a quick mention, but they kind of didn't want to give it too much coverage. But for no reason, he just kind of picks him up out of the blue. I don't know if you spotted that, but it was just so unnecessary.
Yeah, I did see that actually.
I don't understand why he's thrown his tires out of the pram when it was his mistake. He went deep. Morbidelli was on a lap. The fact that he passed him and then tries to lunge back at him, and Morbidelli is trying to stay on his lap and trying, if you pass someone while they're doing a decent speed, you're clearly trying to keep your lap going. So Morbidelli's probably on some sort of race run or whatever, trying to get prepared for Q1. But for whatever reason, Aleix lunges, pushes them both off track, and then the slap is just not acceptable at all. So it's a poor weekend from Aleix on and off the track. So he'll have to reset. I'm not really sure if he'll be in Valencia tomorrow in a week's time, just because of the injury. I saw a statement why he retired from the race wasn't because of the injury. He said that his leg had swelled up and he basically had lost power. In my honest opinion, I think it was the main thing was just to get the penalty cleaned off the plate and get that done. We've seen issues before where Marcus at the start of the season missing races because penalties were handed out wrong and it all ended up kind of a mess. So I think sometimes it's better off to kind of come to the track and get the penalty cleared. But I reckon that was probably the main reason why he raced today. But to finish up, Marini, solid weekend. We get the championship then to finish off the podcast. But pole position, 2 podiums, a man who's possibly on his way to Repsol Honda. We're still no closer to knowing. Probably Luca's best weekend of the season. Is that fair to say?
I'd say it's best weekend of GP. I would say, to be honest, pole position, 2 podiums, pretty good, pretty low key as well.
Yeah.
He didn't really play a part in the weekend generally. He kind of shocked everyone with the pole position, which I know he has done previously at Mandalika, but still it was a surprise to see him on pole position because he hadn't looked like amazing all weekend. It wasn't like he was odds-on favourite or anything. And then obviously sort of ran second place in the sprint and the main race for a while, got passed by people, and then seemed to just find his way back past them as the race went on. Alex Marquez especially. I think Alex Marquez, he might have put the same pass on him in both races, but either way in the end, Alex Marquez struggled and ended up dropping back a little bit in both of them. And 2 third places, you can't really go wrong with that, to be fair to Marini. Pretty low key. Didn't feature too much, so I don't have a lot to say about him, but fair play to him because he's not exactly a podium hound, particularly. He does tend to struggle, and he's massively outperformed Bezzecchi this weekend. Bezzecchi was nowhere all weekend. I mean, we were on about Martin having a dud tyre, and he's saying that he got, his tyre's been ruined. Bezzecchi was still miles behind Martin, so yeah, I guess he's still injured a little bit, is Marco, but yeah, it's fair play to Marini. He's got all these rumours going around. Well, I suppose he knows what's actually going on, so I suppose for him it's not so much a rumour, but he knows what's going on with him and HRC and stuff, and yeah, it's his best weekend at GP so far, I would say. Massively outperformed his teammate, 2 podiums, pole position, don't really go much better for him, and if he is going to end up going to HRC, I think that'll be interesting, but definitely perhaps helped his case a little bit there. You could say that he's when the bike's working for him, he's solid and can bring him good results.
Makes you wonder: is it the right decision to leave when he's had a decent season?
Absolutely not. No,
Well,
but,
I suppose that is the easy answer.
So why would you? I mean, I guess Honda will probably get there eventually. Like if you believe their history, and if he really wants to be a factory rider, maybe he could try and build the project. But you're on a bike that's just won the race, like in the hands of another guy. So yeah, like you're on a race winning bike, jump into, well, to be fair, a race winning bike, I guess technically, if you look at Austin, but you know what I mean. It's a pretty terrible bike. Like it's barely a top 10 bike at every track except Austin, I guess. So unless you want one win a season and nothing else, then I guess if you want one win a season and lots of injuries, then the Honda's the way to go. But yeah, it's a strange move, definitely.
It's been rumored that it'll be a 3-year deal, so he'll have plenty of time to kind of build the team around him. And it could be a master stroke. Maybe if these ride height devices get banned, and maybe if the tech starts to kind of go away a bit, Honda will straight away be closer to the front, which then means they can develop the bike around Mir, Marini, Zarco, and eventually, I suppose, Igor when he probably gets up into that position there. So it's an interesting 18 months, 2 years that's ahead of Honda, and I suppose if Marini is taken to kind of captaincy there of that and kind of taking the charge. And to be fair, you'd imagine maybe not as drastically as we've seen in the past, but if Ducati lose some of their tech, they will lose a bit of their advantage and Honda will go forward. So maybe it wouldn't be as bad as we think. Maybe it won't be as crazy as we all think now. At the moment, it does seem majorly a silly move. There'll be a massive paycheck from Honda, you'd imagine. He'll be the kind of rider Honda would need, that kind of rider that's very thoughtful, very good at data, and kind of probably a very good development rider. But
he doesn't crash a lot either, so that might be helpful. I know the Honda's easier to crash, but generally he's not a crasher, so to actually bring the bike home would be a start for them.
Exactly, yeah. Getting like even when Stefan Bradl turns up most weekends, he either crashes in qualifying or doesn't make the flag, or if he does, he's doing like 2 or 3 seconds off the pace at the end. So it's questionable whether that data is any use. But you touched there on the fact that he's getting off a bike that won the race in someone else's hands, but that's probably the issue. He's not winning on that bike. He's not in favour, and on that bike, of course, he probably has a contract with Valentino for probably many years to come if he wants to stay there. But at some point in your career, do you want to go down knowing that you kind of I don't want to say he's well deserving of the seat there, like, but he probably wants to prove more that he's a top class rider in his own sense. Then, I rode in my brother's team for 6 seasons and I got 3 wins and 7 pole positions. I did decent for myself, but I was always comfortable in Valentino's team. He probably doesn't want that to be his outline of his whole career. I'd imagine that in his eyes, he goes to Honda, and if it does work, maybe he ends up in that Ducati again in 18 months' time, 2 years' time. Maybe he breaks the contract, gets back to PR46. So you never know really what to like. Who would have said when Marquez broke his arm in 20 that he wouldn't win the title for a couple of years and then end up on a satellite Ducati. So it's in this sport, it's constantly changing. But to end off on probably the point we've all kind of been here for, the championship, Rhys, is it done? Is it not? Is it in?
It's done.
Oh, that was straight away. That was in. I thought
it's completely. It's done. Yeah,
completely.
Yeah, unless Bagnaia really chokes, it's done because Martin has struggled the last couple of weekends in the Grand Prix, and he basically needs to win the Grand Prix and the sprint. So it's going to be difficult for him to even do that. And Bagnaia's only got a finish, so far behind. Same situation as last year, really. I mean, he did struggle with that. He obviously felt the pressure. He kind of choked a little bit, like he was really coasting around slow. But he's won a championship now, so it's probably not going to happen as much. And he's got Bastianini's potentially as a bit of a backup rider to him if needed. And some of the other riders are just he's going to probably beat the Hondas regardless of what happens, stuff like that. But yeah, I can't see Martin pulling it back now. I think it's too big of a gap, in my opinion. Anyway, sorry to put a bit of a damp squib on it, but yeah, I think it's completely done. It was not as stretch as it was, but he was already going to have to make sure he beat him. He was going to basically have to try and win everything until this point, and yeah, now it's just not going to happen now. I don't think, because what's the gap? 20? Is it 21 points now?
22, I think.
Yeah, so that's a whole race wins worth. You get peanuts for the sprint, because I felt quite bad for him in a way that in the sprint race he wins. Bagnaia's 5th. The swing there's 3 points.
Yeah,
that's less than a first to second.
Well, no, it was 7 points because you have to 14 to 7.
Oh, 7. Okay, fair enough. It's just over a first. It's worse to finish 3rd to him in the main race than it was to finish 5th there.
Yeah,
which makes sense because it's a 50% race, 50% points. It's fair, but it's difficult to, and that's where he's strong. So he's difficult for him to make big inroads, because even if Bagnaia does pretty badly in the sprint, you don't gain much back. Whereas in the main race, that's where he seems to struggle more, or where Bagnaia comes stronger. So it's always. I thought my money was with Martin until this weekend, until today. But from now, there's 1 round left, 21 points. Bagnaia's just got to bring it home. He's perfectly capable of doing that. I think 2 top 5s will pretty much do it, and he's pretty much done that all season. So yeah, I think it's done.
Yeah, I don't think it's completely done, because I think we've gone to Valencia before, and championships have ended in different ways.
Well, yeah, of course, technically it's possible, but I just don't see it.
I just think the whole show at Valencia of weather, the track, GP at the moment, it does a lot of pharaohs at the moment. In fact, we have a sprint that just throws everything into it. So we've seen it through, again, look at Holgado's season in Moto 3 for first 2.
That didn't unravel in 1 race though.
True, but anything can happen. You can have dips in form and stuff. So
I mean, look at Bagnaia. Who would have thought after Austria that he would be taking this battle, to the last round after the way he'd won there, and Martin was at P7. It's and Bezzecchi was still the closest guy at that point, I think. So look at Bezzecchi now. If Martin hadn't stepped to the plate, Bagnaia would have wrapped it weeks ago. So,
yeah, exactly. It was. I think Martin has done a stellar job to kind of get himself back on the plane. I think he kind of sees his opportunity of really getting an opportunity to win something. The fact that Pecco was walking in wounded and stuff, but I think it's more possible than last year. Put it that way. I think last year it wasn't like 22
that's true.
points, but
that's true.
I think the sprint will probably decide it. I think Martin needs to win the sprint and Pecco basically needs a non-score. And if that doesn't happen, I think it's over. But even then,
Zarco needs to do his Marquez move. That
attempt to murder that was ridiculous. That was one of 69 million moves tonight that was just stupid and made no sense. And like Zarco's not that sort of rider. It's everything's getting messy at this point, and it's very like Formula 1-esque. I felt like this weekend was very Abu Dhabi 21 with Perez doing all that kind of defensive driving and sending it on Lewis, and it feels all like that. And I hated that, and I hated the way that season ended. Like, fair enough.
That was still more fair though than what La Masia was doing.
Yeah, I think. The teammate issue there, but the ending, that was bloody ridiculous as well. But we're going to end the podcast today. A tweet 32 minutes ago from Beamer Pamic Racing MotoGP. So
this will be interesting.
This is a good one. It might be lost and translated, but when life gives you lemons, make a comeback. Disappointed but not defeated. Do you have anything to add to that one? Classical term there, taken and twisted into something interesting. Bit of a weird one. I don't get the humour of when life gives you lemons, make a comeback, but they're probably trying to keep their heads above water, and I think
maybe if he squeezes lemon juice into Bagnaio's eyes or something, maybe that's how he wins the championship.
Exactly, there's maybe Mario style lemons off the back of the Prima Pamic Academy.
Mario Kart starts chucking lemons behind it.
But on that wild note, I think we both kind of given our predictions that championship is done in most senses. I wouldn't say confident, but I always felt like somehow Pecco would find a way to get this title across the line. I just thought that the fact that, like I said, factory rider, already won a title.
He's made it a lot harder than it should have been.
Exactly.
I think we could agree on that.
He's done it the Pecco way of kind of like throwing a couple of duds
like
in
last year,
like there was no need, like there's a couple of misfires, and I still think next year when he goes up against or the next couple of years when it's Pedro Acosta, Marquez, Aldeguer, a competitive machine under Fabio, I still think that he has a lot to do to beat them in terms of consistently over a year. But at the moment, I think this
you don't crash 4 times and still beat Marquez, do you?
No, you do not. You don't crash at all, and you still don't beat Marquez.
That's true.
Valentino finished every race in 2018 and still wasn't anywhere near Marquez that season, so it just shows
how many times was he on the podium?
That's true too, I suppose. But
I'm sure Simeon finished most of the races, but I don't think
that's true too. But I suppose we will end it there. We will be back in 1 week's time for the finale, and we will have our 3rd championship settled. Thank you for listening in. If you are listening in on Spotify, do give us a 5 rating stars, just because it helps get the podcast out there. And we want to end off season 2 of the Motogp Xtra podcast on a high, just like Pecco Bagnaia. But thank you all for tuning in, and we shall see you in a week's time in Valencia. Bye bye.